A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
Hey everyone, welcome back to my weird prompts. I am Corn, and I am joined as always by my brother,
Herman Poppleberry, ready to dive into the shadows today. Now, usually we are responding to a specific audio prompt from our housemate Daniel, but today we are doing things a little differently. The production team actually flagged this topic for us because it has been coming up in a lot of our recent research, and honestly, it is a glaring hole in the public conversation about global security.
It really is. When most people think about intelligence or espionage, they have this very specific, very cinematic image in their heads. It is either James Bond in a tuxedo representing MI6, or it is a high-tech control room at the CIA headquarters in Langley, or perhaps the legendary mystique of the Mossad. We have this Hollywood effect where we think of intelligence as a superpower exclusive, something only the big players do. It is all high-stakes poker games and dramatic rooftop chases.
Right, and that creates a massive blind spot. We tend to view the world through the lens of the Big Five or the Big Three, assuming that if a country is not a global hegemon, they must just be flying blind. But the reality is that intelligence has become a global commodity. It is not just for the giants anymore. In fact, some of the most effective and consequential work is being done by agencies that most people could not even name. We are talking about organizations that operate with surgical precision in their own backyards, often outperforming the big names because they have a level of local nuance that a global agency simply cannot replicate.
Today we want to pull back that curtain. We are moving beyond the famous names to look at the true global landscape of intelligence as it stands here in March of 2026. How many countries actually have these dedicated agencies? How do countries like Ireland manage without a traditional foreign spy service? And what is the real story behind the regional powerhouses in the Middle East like Jordan or the United Arab Emirates?
This is where it gets fascinating because the Professional Intelligence Organization, as we know it today, is actually a relatively modern invention. It is not some ancient feature of statehood. It is a bureaucratic construct that really only solidified in the mid-20th century. So, Corn, where do you want to start? Should we look at the sheer scale of this world first?
Let us start there, because when you look at the numbers, it is actually quite surprising. There are roughly 195 sovereign states in the world today. But if you look for dedicated, independent foreign intelligence services, the kind that operate strictly outside their own borders, with their own separate budget and leadership, that number drops significantly.
It really does. Depending on how you define a dedicated agency, you are looking at fewer than 60 countries that maintain a formal, standalone foreign intelligence service. Now, every country has some form of intelligence capability, usually tucked away inside their military or their national police force. But the idea of a civilian agency whose primary job is overseas collection and covert action, that is a post-World War II phenomenon. It was the Cold War that really birthed the idea that a modern state needs a permanent, professionalized spy service to survive.
Right, and that is a key distinction. Before the mid-20th century, intelligence was mostly a military function. You had scouts, you had attaches, you had code breakers who worked for the army or the navy. But the birth of the modern agency, like the CIA in 1947, changed the template for what a state is supposed to look like. It became a sort of status symbol of modern statehood. If you wanted to be a serious player on the world stage, you needed a 3-letter acronym and a headquarters with a seal on the floor.
It is almost like a prerequisite for the modern bureaucratic state, but it is an incredibly costly one. Maintaining a global intelligence network requires immense financial resources, technical infrastructure like satellites and server farms, and a very specific kind of human capital. You need linguists, analysts, and field officers who can blend in anywhere, which leads to a really interesting question for 2026. Is a formal agency actually a requirement for statehood anymore? Or has the model shifted towards something more decentralized and hybrid?
Well, that brings us to the Ireland model, which I find absolutely fascinating. Ireland is a modern, developed Western nation, a member of the European Union, yet they do not have a dedicated foreign intelligence agency. They do not have an equivalent to the CIA or the Mossad. They do not have people in trench coats running around foreign capitals trying to flip sources.
And for some people, that sounds like a recipe for disaster. They wonder how a country can protect itself from international terrorism, cyber attacks, or foreign interference without a shadow army of spies. But Ireland has a very specific approach. They rely on what is called police-led intelligence, specifically the Garda Special Detective Unit, or the SDU.
Right, and it is a very different philosophy. Instead of having a separate agency that operates in the shadows with very little public oversight, they centralize their security functions within the National Police Force, the Garda Síochána. The SDU handles counter-terrorism and state security. They also have the G2, which is the military intelligence branch, but even that is relatively small and focused primarily on protecting Irish defense forces during their various UN peacekeeping missions abroad.
What is interesting here is the trade-off. By not having a massive foreign intelligence apparatus, Ireland avoids a lot of the political and ethical baggage that comes with covert action. They do not have to worry about the blowback from a failed coup or an exposed assassination plot. But they also have to be masters of the intelligence liaison. They essentially outsource a lot of their high-level foreign intelligence needs by being a very good partner to larger agencies.
This is a point we touched on back in episode 779 when we were talking about operational security in the digital age. In a world that is so interconnected, you do not necessarily need to own the sensor if you have a good relationship with the person who does. Ireland trades its domestic stability and its strategic location for access to the wider intelligence pools of the European Union and the United States. They provide a stable environment for multinational corporations, and in return, they get a seat at the table when it comes to shared security data.
It is a sovereignty versus capability trade-off. If you are Ireland, you are not trying to project power in the South China Sea. You are trying to make sure that international crime syndicates or terrorist cells do not use your territory as a staging ground. For that, a highly competent police intelligence unit that knows the local streets and the local players is often more effective than a bunch of spies trying to play games in foreign capitals. They focus on the domestic end of the international threat.
But it does raise the question of dependency. If you are relying on the CIA or MI6 for your early warnings about a threat coming from the Middle East or Eastern Europe, are you truly an independent actor? Or have you effectively signed away a portion of your strategic autonomy in exchange for a security umbrella? If the CIA tells you there is a threat, you have to take it seriously, even if it aligns with their political goals more than yours.
That is the million-dollar question, Corn. And it is not just Ireland. You see this with a lot of smaller nations in Scandinavia or Southeast Asia. They leverage partnerships. They offer something the big guys want, like geographic access, a specific linguistic expertise, or a unique cultural perspective, and in return they get the high-tech signals, intelligence, or the satellite imagery they could never produce on their own. It is a marketplace of information where the currency is access and cooperation.
Speaking of cultural expertise and strategic locations, we really have to talk about the Middle East. This is where the gap between public fame and actual influence is the widest. Everyone knows the Mossad. They're the stars of every other spy thriller on Netflix. But if you want to understand the actual mechanics of security in that region, you have to look at agencies like Jordan's GID, the General Intelligence Directorate.
Oh, the GID is a powerhouse. In the intelligence community, they are often referred to as one of the most effective human intelligence, or HUMINT, organizations in the world. They are the quiet professionals of the Middle East. While everyone is watching the headlines about flashy Mossad operations or CIA drone strikes, the GID is doing the hard, grinding work of building networks across some of the most difficult environments on the planet.
Why is that? Why has Jordan, a country without massive oil wealth or a huge military, become such an intelligence hub? They do not have the technical resources of the Americans or the Israelis, so how do they stay so relevant?
It is a survival mechanism, plain and simple. Jordan sits at the crossroads of everything. They are bordered by Israel, Syria, Iraq, and Saudi Arabia. For the Hashemite monarchy, intelligence is not just a tool of statecraft. It is the primary reason they have remained stable while the region around them has often been in flames. They have turned their geography into a strategic asset. They know everyone, they talk to everyone, and they understand the tribal and familial connections that actually drive politics in the Levant.
And they have a very specific relationship with Western agencies. For decades, the GID has been the primary conduit for the CIA in the region. When the United States needs to understand what is happening inside a specific tribal network in Iraq or a militant group in Syria, they often turn to the Jordanians. The GID has a level of cultural nuance and street-level access that a Westerner, no matter how well trained, can rarely replicate. They can tell the difference between a genuine threat and local posturing because they speak the language of the street, not just the language of the textbook.
It is about the quality of their human networks. They have spent decades cultivating sources not just through technology, but through deep, long-term relationships. And because Jordan is seen as a relatively stable and moderate partner, they can act as a bridge. They can talk to people that the Americans or the Israelis cannot talk to directly. That makes them an indispensable middleman in the intelligence marketplace. They are the ones who can verify if a piece of electronic intelligence actually matches the reality on the ground.
It is interesting because it challenges the idea that the most technologically advanced agency is always the most competent. You can have all the satellites and cyber tools in the world, but if you do not understand the tribal dynamics of a village in the desert, you're going to miss the most important developments. The GID proves that human intelligence is still the gold standard in many parts of the world, especially in areas where people have learned how to hide from the digital eye.
And then you have Egypt's GIS, the General Intelligence Service. This is a very different beast. In Egypt, the GIS is often described as a state within a state. They are not just an intelligence agency, they are a fundamental pillar of the regime's power. They have their own companies, their own media influence, and a massive domestic footprint.
Right. They are deeply involved in domestic politics and the economy. Under figures like the late Omar Suleiman, the GIS was the primary architect of Egypt's foreign policy, especially regarding the Palestinian territories and the relationship with Israel. They are the ultimate practitioners of realpolitik. They are not looking for ideological victories. They are looking for stability and the preservation of the Egyptian state structure.
And unlike the more public-facing Mossad, the GIS operates with a level of opacity that is truly staggering. They are focused on one thing above all else: regime stability. Whether that means mediating between Hamas and Fatah or monitoring domestic dissent within Egypt, the GIS is the engine under the hood of the Egyptian state. Their competence is not measured in flashy assassinations, but in the fact that the state structure has survived through decades of immense internal and external pressure.
It is a good reminder that in many parts of the world, the line between foreign intelligence and internal security is non-existent. For an agency like the GIS, a threat in Gaza is a domestic security threat in Cairo. They do not have the luxury of separating the two. Their intelligence work is an extension of their domestic survival strategy.
Now, contrast that with the newer players in the Gulf, like the United Arab Emirates and Qatar. This is where the landscape is shifting in a very modern, very high-tech direction. These are countries with immense wealth and small populations. They cannot compete with Egypt or Jordan on raw manpower or decades of deep human networks, so they have taken a different approach. They have essentially bought their way into the top tier.
They have pioneered the concept of intelligence as a tool of economic and diplomatic statecraft. For the UAE, intelligence is not just about stopping bombs. It is about financial flows, influence operations, and cyber surveillance. They want to know where the money is moving and who is trying to influence the global narrative.
Right. They have spent billions of dollars on the best technology money can buy. We are talking about high-end cyber tools, sophisticated data analytics, and hiring former Western intelligence officers as consultants. They have built a world-class intelligence apparatus almost from scratch in just a few decades. They are the ones using AI and machine learning to track illicit financial networks or to monitor social media for signs of regional instability.
It is a very different model. It is more corporate, in a way. They use their intelligence capabilities to protect their economic interests and to project soft power. Qatar does something similar, but with a different focus. They use their intelligence networks to act as a regional mediator, often hosting groups that other nations won't touch. They have made themselves the essential hub for negotiations.
It is a fascinating strategy. By being the ones who can talk to everyone, from the Taliban to the Americans to various rebel groups in Libya or Syria, Qatar makes itself indispensable. Their intelligence service is the backbone of their diplomacy. It is not about covert action in the traditional sense, it is about being the person in the room with the most information. They use intelligence to ensure they are never sidelined in regional discussions.
This really brings us back to the idea of the competence gap. We tend to assume that the big agencies are just better at everything because they have more money. But as we discussed in episode 950, when we looked at how professional networking sites are being used for espionage, the smaller, more agile agencies are often quicker to adapt to new realities. They do not have the massive bureaucratic inertia of a place like Langley.
They have to be agile. If you are a smaller agency, you cannot afford to be a massive, slow-moving bureaucracy. You have to find your niche and dominate it. The UAE is a perfect example. They recognized early on that the future of conflict is going to be largely digital and financial, so they focused their resources there. While the CIA was still trying to reform its massive post-9/11 bureaucracy, the Emiratis were building a lean, high-tech cyber force that could punch way above its weight class.
And that leads to a very uncomfortable reality for the big players. Sometimes, the junior partner is actually more capable in a specific domain. There have been instances where Western agencies have had to rely on Gulf partners for technical expertise in areas like encrypted communication monitoring or tracking illicit financial networks through complex offshore structures. The teacher has become the student in some of these high-tech fields.
It is a complete inversion of the traditional hierarchy, and it is being accelerated by the explosion of open source intelligence, or OSINT. We talked about this in episode 952. The fact that so much high-quality data is now publicly available means that a small, smart agency can achieve results that used to require a multi-billion-dollar satellite constellation. You do not need a spy satellite if you can buy high-resolution commercial imagery and have a team of smart analysts who know how to interpret it.
It levels the playing field. If you are a mid-sized power with a few dozen very talented data scientists and some good regional analysts, you can produce intelligence that is just as actionable as what comes out of a much larger organization. The barrier to entry has never been lower. You can build a very effective intelligence service today for a fraction of what it cost 20 years ago.
But that also means the world is becoming much more crowded and much more unpredictable. When you only had 2 or 3 major players, like during the Cold War, you could generally predict the rules of the game. Now you have dozens of agencies, each with their own agendas, their own capabilities, and their own risk tolerances. It is a much more complex chessboard where the pawns can suddenly start moving like queens.
It really is. And I think that is the biggest takeaway for our listeners. We need to stop thinking about intelligence as a monolith dominated by a few famous names. The true global landscape is a fragmented, competitive, and highly specialized ecosystem. It is not just about the big guys anymore. It is about who has the best data and the best understanding of the local context.
If you want to understand where the next major geopolitical shift is going to come from, do not just look at what the CIA director is saying in a testimony before Congress. Look at the budget lines for the security services in countries like Singapore or Vietnam or Poland. Look at how regional powers are using their intelligence services to carve out their own spheres of influence. These are the places where the real innovation and the real shifts in power are happening.
That is such an important point. In Poland, for example, their intelligence and counterintelligence services have become some of the most critical players in Europe, given the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. They have a level of focus and a sense of existential urgency that you do not always find in larger, more insulated nations. They are on the front lines, and their intelligence reflects that. They are providing insights into Russian capabilities that even the big Western agencies are scrambling to match.
It is the difference between intelligence as a global management tool and intelligence as a survival tool. When your borders are directly threatened, your intelligence service tends to become very efficient very quickly. You do not have time for bureaucratic infighting or mission creep. You focus on what matters, knowing what the person on the other side of the border is doing.
So, looking ahead to the rest of 2026 and beyond, where does this go? Does the rise of AI and automated data collection make the human-centric regional agency obsolete? Or does it make them even more important because they provide the context that the machines miss?
I think it makes them more important, but in a different way. AI is going to commoditize the analysis of large data sets. Anyone with a good algorithm can track ship movements or monitor social media sentiment across a whole continent. But I cannot tell you what a specific general in a specific country is thinking during a private meeting. It cannot navigate the complex web of tribal and family loyalties that drive decision-making in many parts of the world. It cannot tell you who is actually trusted and who is just a figurehead.
Right. The more the world becomes saturated with data, the more valuable the unique human insight becomes. The agencies that can combine high-tech collection with deep, localized human intelligence are the ones that will truly dominate the next few decades. It is the hybrid model that wins. You need the algorithm to find the needle, but you need the human to tell you why the needle matters.
And that is exactly where those regional players have the advantage. They live there. They speak the language, not just literally, but culturally. They understand the nuances of a specific political rivalry or a historical grievance that an AI trained on Western data sets is going to miss every single time. They have the context that makes the data meaningful.
It is a fascinating shift. We are moving from the era of the intelligence superpower to the era of the intelligence specialist. And frankly, I think it makes for a much more interesting, if more volatile, world. It means we have to pay attention to a lot more actors than we used to.
It definitely does. It means we have to be much more diligent as observers. We cannot just rely on the mainstream narrative that focuses on the big names. We have to look at the periphery, because that is where the real action is often happening. We have to look at the quiet agencies that are shaping their regions from the shadows.
Well, I think we have covered a lot of ground today, from the professionalization of intelligence post-1947 to the police-led model in Ireland and the specialized powerhouses in the Middle East. It is a much bigger world than Hollywood would have us believe. It is less about tuxedos and more about data points and deep cultural knowledge.
It really is. And for those of you listening, I hope this gives you a new lens through which to view the news. When you hear about a diplomatic breakthrough or a sudden shift in regional dynamics, ask yourself, which quiet agency was working behind the scenes to make that happen? It was probably not the one you are thinking of. It was likely a regional player with a very specific set of skills and a very clear goal.
And hey, if you are finding these deep dives valuable, we would really appreciate it if you could leave us a review on your podcast app or on Spotify. It genuinely helps other people find the show and allows us to keep digging into these complex topics. We want to keep bringing you these insights into the parts of the world that usually stay hidden.
Yeah, it makes a huge difference. We love seeing the community grow. And if you want to see our full archive, including those episodes we mentioned on OSINT and the LinkedInification of espionage, head over to myweirdprompts.com. You can find everything there, including a contact form if you want to reach out with your own thoughts or questions. We love hearing from you.
Thanks again to the production team for flagging this topic. It was a great one to explore. We will be back next time with another prompt, another deep dive, and hopefully some more of those aha moments that change how you see the world.
Looking forward to it. This has been My Weird Prompts.
Until next time, stay curious and keep looking past the headlines. Bye for now.
Goodbye, everyone.
You know, Herman, I was just thinking about the island thing again. It really is a bold move to just say, we're not going to have a spy agency. It is almost a form of strategic humility. It is a recognition of their size and their role in the world.
It is, but it is also very pragmatic. Ireland knows its place in the global order. They are not trying to be a superpower. They are trying to be a stable, prosperous hub for international business and culture. In that context, a massive, aggressive intelligence agency might actually be a liability. It could provoke the very threats they are trying to avoid by making them a target for counter-espionage.
It is like the difference between a house with a giant aggressive guard dog and a house with a really sophisticated silent alarm and a great relationship with the neighborhood watch. Both can be effective, but they send very different messages to the neighbors. One says stay away, the other says we are part of the community.
That is a great analogy, and most of the world is actually closer to the neighborhood watch model than the guard dog model. We just spend all our time talking about the dogs because they make for better movies. But the neighborhood watch is often what actually keeps the street safe.
Well, maybe it is time we started paying more attention to the neighborhood watch. There is a lot of wisdom in how these smaller states navigate a world of giants. They have to be smarter because they cannot afford to be stronger.
There really is. And as the giants become more distracted by their own internal dramas and their own massive bureaucracies, those smaller, more focused actors are going to have even more room to maneuver. They are the ones who will be setting the pace in the coming years.
It is going to be a wild ride. All right, let us wrap this up before we start another 30-minute discussion on Polish counterintelligence or the nuances of Singaporean signals intelligence.
Fair point. I could go all day on those. The way Singapore integrates its intelligence into its urban planning is a whole other episode.
I know you could. See you at home, brother.
See you there.
Thanks for listening to My Weird Prompts. Find us on Spotify and at myweirdprompts.com. We will talk to you soon.
Take care, everyone.
One last thing, Herman. Do you think Daniel actually knows how much we talk about him on this show? I mean, we mention him almost every episode.
Oh, I think he has a pretty good idea. He is probably listening to this right now while he is making coffee in the kitchen, shaking his head at our nerdiness.
Well, if you are listening, Daniel, thanks for the inspiration, even when it is not a direct prompt. Your presence in the house keeps us on our toes.
All right, now we are really going. Bye.
Bye.
So, Korn, I was actually looking at some data on the Jordanian GID's recent cooperation with the UAE on tracking illicit drone parts. It is a perfect example of what we were talking about. They are combining Jordanian human networks with Emirati technical tracking.
Oh, really? Tell me more about that. Was it a formal agreement or more of an ad hoc operation?
It started as an ad hoc thing, but it has evolved into a pretty sophisticated information sharing network. They are using some really interesting blockchain analysis tools to track the financing of these parts through various shell companies.
That is fascinating. It is that intersection of old school HUM, INT, and new school fintech. It is exactly the kind of thing the big agencies are often too slow to catch.
It is the future of the field.
All right, now we are definitely done. For real this time.
For real, goodbye.
Goodbye.
Wait, one more thing.
No, Herman. We are done.
Just kidding. Let's go.
You're impossible.
I know. It's part of my charm.
If you say so. See you later.
See you.
This has been My Weird Prompts, episode 951. Thanks for sticking with us through the long ones. We think they're worth it.
We definitely do. See you in the next one.
Bye.
Bye.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, My Weird Prompts, where our thoughts go from slow takes to facts on cue. We change and follow through. My Weird Prompts, that's the close from sloth